Anyone who's ever picked up a controller or used a mouse and keyboard will probably know how unbearably frustrating it is to be repeatedly killed by an unfair baddie. But being stonewalled by the final boss is more aggravating, considering that the finish line is just a stone's throw away. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 final bosses that made you give up entirely. Number 10. Yaldabaoth, Persona 5. It can easily take up to 100 hours to beat Persona 5, or if you're me, 150 hours, since it's an immense campaign and it's got a ton of side missions. By the time Joker and his companions reach the final boss, Yaldabaoth, players will already be exhausted, and so you'll want the epic fight to be over as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, this self-proclaimed god has no intention of going down without giving it his all. While Joker's team try to focus their assault directly on Yaldabaoth, he'll routinely pull out weaponized appendages, each with their own distinctive attacks. It's risky to hit every target simultaneously because Yaldabaoth's limbs will redirect certain moves towards the heroes. As a result, your team will be incentivized to eliminate the arms before you focus on the glorified deity. But since Yaldabaoth can keep summoning more limbs, that strategy is ultimately counterintuitive. Also, this is a long-ass match, which means it's very easy to run out of SP, which you need to perform the biggest specials. Sadly, there's no outlet to gain SP prior to the final showdown. Unless Joker has plenty of SP recovering items handy, this confrontation is sure to be unforgivable. Number 9. God Rugal, Capcom vs SNK2. If certain conditions are met while playing Capcom vs SNK2's campaign mode, a secret final boss will be unlocked called God Rugal. Despite the fact that 3 fighters can be selected to face him, this overpowered foe is not to be trifled with. Although regular Rugal needs a moment to charge up his strongest attacks, this incarnation doesn't, which allows him to wipe the floor against almost anybody in seconds. He has triple the health of any other combatant, so the most powerful combos and super attacks will barely make a dent in his health bar. Several of his moves are unblockable, including the infamous Raging Demon, which is nearly impossible to survive. Worst of all, Rugal only has 1 or 2 frames of recovery while attacking, giving his opponents the tiniest window of opportunity to retaliate. However, this barely matters because the devilish bastard can interrupt any move by teleporting away or executing his own lethal special. It may be 3 against 1, but challenging God Rugal feels like going up against an entire army due to his broken tactics. Number 8. The Lord of Doors, Death's Door. Death's Door centers around a crow who reaps souls to bring balance to the afterlife. In the closing moments, the Feathered Reaper encounters the Lord of Doors, an entity who's closed the door to his own mortality. Desperate to live forever, the Lord challenges the Reaper to an arduous 8-part battle, half of which involves straightforward fights, while the other half involves obstacle-filled chases. Although the first 7 stages can take up to an hour to complete, there's an opportunity to save before the last part. Thank God. However, the final conflict doesn't just test the player's skills, but their patience. The Lord never stops launching himself at the crow, charging around the room, churning out fireballs, shooting lasers, creating shockwaves, or summoning demons. Sometimes he attacks while outside the arena, making it impossible to hit him. Worst of all, the crow can only hit the Lord while standing right next to him. Not only that, the helmeted warrior tries to counterattack every single time our hero is near him. Before engaging with the Lord of Doors, players need to make sure they have a couple of hours to spare, since this scuffle isn't going to end anytime soon. Number 7. Yami, Okami. In Okami's climax, Amaterasu ventures inside a spaceship to confront the overarching antagonist, Yami. But before challenging Yami, a rematch with all the major bosses is required. Although Amaterasu will be much stronger this time around, the boss rush is pretty time-consuming. When that's all taken care of, Amaterasu will finally face her nemesis. The confrontation kicks off with the so-called Emperor of Everlasting Darkness stripping the deified wolf of her powers. If that sounds unfair, that's just the first phase. As Amaterasu deals more damage to her archenemy, the furry hero will have her abilities returned to her slowly but surely. However, that doesn't make the rest of the engagement any easier for one simple reason. Since Yami often resembles an expressionless orb, it's tough to gauge what he's going to do. So it's never clear whether the sinister sphere is getting ready to charge, fly away, attack, or launch a myriad of projectiles. Coupled with the boss rush, this scrap can can take over 2 hours. Even though Okami is challenging, the relentless onslaught at the end is just in a whole other league. Number 6. Virgil, Devil May Cry 3: Dante's Awakening. Throughout the Devil May Cry franchise, Dante and his allies have squared off against all sorts of ungodly monstrosities. However, nobody has given the wisecracking demon hunter more trouble than his own brother Virgil. Though Dante faces his introverted twin a number of times in DMC3, the final bout is the most memorable. Memorable for all the wrong reasons, of course, you know what the list is called. The moment to strike Virgil is limited since he only leaves himself open for a second while sheathing his blade or preparing certain moves. Trying to hit Dante's twisted sibling at any other moment is absolutely pointless since he'll simply deflect the attack. After chipping away at his health, Virgil will start fighting dirty, more dirty. During the second half of the match, he'll begin to heal and use a barrier, so you can't get anywhere near him. However, what makes this duel so grueling is the incessant teleporting. Even if Dante catches Virgil in a killer combo, the white-haired rival can just teleport away. On top of that, he keeps appearing above or behind Dante, which makes it difficult to line up attacks. Though Dante has encountered dozens of hellish creatures before and since, nobody's tested him as much as Virgil. Number 5. Dracula, Castlevania Circle of the Moon. Circle of the Moon concludes with vampire killer Nathan Graves duking it out with Dracula, which is pretty standard for the Castlevania series. However, defeating the Prince of Darkness has never been this brutal. After Nathan seemingly wins, Drac transports the whip-wielding warrior to the sealed room before transforming into a monstrous creature. Despite his immense size, the Transylvanian bloodsucker's weak point is tiny, so even the most outlandish strikes can miss him. Dracula can also shield his vulnerable spot with ooze, making it extra tricky to injure him. When he surrounds himself with bats, it's also nearly impossible to hit him without sustaining damage. Although Dracula blasts Nathan with lasers and meteors, his most devastating projectile is, well, himself. If he charges into Nathan, our holy champion is as good as dead unless you're at full health. And since Dracula will perform his lethal charge over and over again, you gotta dodge it every single time to avoid an early grave. Number 4. Idol, Killer Instinct. When it comes to the fighting genre, bosses like M. Bison, Jinpachi, and Shao Kahn are infamous for their cheap tactics. But let's not forget about the antagonist of 1994's Killer Instinct, Idol. Almost every attack the two-headed ogre performs leads to a ludicrous combo that's likely to eat up half of his opponent's health bar. Hitting him from afar with projectiles is ineffective since Idol can launch himself across the room in an instant before pulling off yet another 20-hit combo. But that's not the worst of it. At any given moment, the bicephalous brute will stomp his hoof, regenerating his health bar. Even if Idol is at the brink of death, he can be back to full health in no time unless you interrupt his stomping. And of course, that's easier said than done. Even after mastering every fighter's moveset and memorizing every combo, nobody's ever truly ready to take on this particular foe. Number 3. Zero, Drakengard 3. No matter how difficult the final boss is, they should abide by the rules that have been established throughout the game. After all, if the main villain relied on a strategy that's never been mentioned before, players would have no idea how to combat it. However, that's exactly what Zero from Drakengard 3 does. During the final brawl, Zero transforms into a godlike colossus and begins striking the lead character Michael with rhythmic-based shockwaves. Players need to press the action button precisely when the shockwave hits Michael to stay alive. In theory, this doesn't sound too hard, but the problem is the following. Drakengard 3 is an RPG. At no point in the 15-hour playthrough did the band of heroes take part in any activity that involves moving in sequence with a music beat. Since there are no instructions on how to defeat Zero, first-timers haven't a clue what they're meant to be doing. Even when players understand Zero's strategy, it's still a nightmare to defeat her. The camera keeps swinging around, so it's hard to see when the shockwave is coming, and worst of all, you have to start at the very beginning again if you screw up. If the input readings were visible on the screen, it would still be a challenge to keep up with the rhythm, but since the input readings remain hidden, the battle is insufferable. Number 2. Cool X 3D, Super Mario RPG Remake. After completing Super Mario RPG's main campaign, our heroes will get to face off against a group of super bosses. Although each of these enemies is rock hard, none can compare to the last adversary, Culex 3D. As imposing as this Final Fantasy themed enemy was the first time around, this version may be the hardest Mario boss ever. Like before, Culex 3D can attack up to 5 times per turn, but since the interdimensional creature now relies on insta-kill attacks and disabling the party's moves, there's little opportunity to perform countermeasures. While the Italian plumber wastes time healing or resuscitating fallen party members, Culex will be preparing his next 5 attacks. Now, the key to winning any fight in Super Mario RPG is by perfecting timed hits. By pressing the action at the right time while striking an enemy, Mario's ensemble can perform an extra hit. For certain attacks, it's theoretically possible to perform 100 timed hits in a row. Although this level of skill is almost unfeasible, it's necessary when facing Culex 3D. Unless Mario and his pals execute a staggering amount of timed hits, the Dark Fiend will win within a few turns. Number 1. Ishin the Sword Saint. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. More often than not, the hardest boss in a From Software title tends to be the optional one. So if players are having trouble with beating a particular foe during a side quest or in the DLC, it shouldn't impair their progress in the main campaign. But when it came to Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, the developers decided to finish things off with the most merciless enemy imaginable, Ishin the Sword Saint. Just to be clear, Sekiro is brutally difficult, even by Souls-like standards, and yet, Ishin still manages to put every other boss to shame. The Master Samurai utilizes an array of swift and unblockable attacks, which will cut Sekiro down to size. Memorizing this attack pattern is far from easy, as Ishin has more moves than any other opponent. Since attacking directly is absolutely suicidal, players need to utilize their deflection skills if you want to last more than 30 seconds. What's worse is Ishin unleashes extensive combos that can't be counted. When he whips out his colossal spear, it's daunting to get close to him without being ripped to shreds. And to top it all off, it's hard to read the elite swordsman's moves because they're often obscured by the tall grass surrounding him. Simply put, the only way to defeat Ishin is to play perfectly. If a single error is made, the chances of coming out on top are pretty much zero.